Hello and welcome to the Be Glad movement. My name's Pollyanna and I'm on a mission to bring you as many stories as possible of good coming out of bad and reasons to be glad. And today I'm joined by Jess. Say hello, Jess.
Hello, nice to meet everybody.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to say what I pretty much say at the beginning of every video, that I'm just going to kind of get out of the way and let you dive straight in and tell your story. So I'm going to let you take us back to where it all began.
Okay, perfect. So, gosh, yeah, now it's back in 2016. I was living in San Francisco at the time, sort of like piecing together all of the bits of the puzzle. Living in San Francisco at the time, absolutely from, outside looking in, living the life that I'd dreamed of, to be honest. I had always wanted to be in the tech world, was working as a product manager, so building products and actually working on a product that was genuinely helping people. So felt very purpose driven and very much aligned with what I wanted to be doing in the world, and loved San Francisco, like absolutely loved living out there. It was a dream of mine since 2012. So to be there was just brilliant and something that, I was so grateful to be able to do. And then a year into living there, I come back for a cheeky Christmas visit and ultimately, out of nowhere, get diagnosed with a life-threatening and ultra-rare blood disease, which, just completely knocked me sideways, to be honest. It wasn't something I could have predicted. In fact, like looking back, like I felt the healthiest I'd ever been. Like it was something that, having moved and I think shortened the commute that I used to have, having got into hobbies like climbing and going to the gym much more often. And after a stint of not eating very healthy food from when I first moved to America, I'd gone to the total opposite. I've got really, really healthy and been doing that for about 9 months really. And then came this diagnosis, and it was all thanks to my mum saying, as you're back visiting, why don't you go get a check on some low iron levels I'd had a couple of years before? And purely through her saying that, they were able to see that something else was going on in my system, and I was diagnosed with a blood disease that's called PNH. And I guess the scary facts about it is that it is life-threatening. So when I was diagnosed, I was a ticking time bomb, basically.
Wow. So
And I was doing...
Sorry, Jess.
Sorry.
There were no
Yeah.
symptoms, like it was just a chance that your mum said, let's go and... Wow.
Yeah, absolutely. So the symptoms should have been feeling fatigued, other symptoms that are like visible in terms of, it would probably gross everybody out now, but certain things that I should have been like, well, that's not quite right. But none of that. And even the fatigue, like it wasn't until I actually started on treatment that I probably realized I'd been fatigued for so long, but just been like powering through it, because either thinking it was just like startup life or, whatever, I'd potentially had it for so long that I'd just become used to that level of energy. Right. And so, and the main risk of it, so the biggest life-threatening part of it is blood clots. So that's what gets most people. And I was flying back and forth from San Francisco to the UK. So like possibly one of the longest long-haul flights you could do. Wasn't doing anything like they tell you to like get up and walk around, obviously, because I was like, I'm young, I don't need to do that. And was on certain medications, like things that would enhance blood clots and risks of that, basically. And so when I was diagnosed, ultimately what PNH means is that the blood cells that I create don't have the coating that they need. So the red ones break themselves down, they go through hemolysis. And the white ones are risky because they then stick together, hence the blood clots. Right. And so you could have, it's 1 in 1.3 million people have it. So hopefully nobody watching this has it, or if they do, they can get in touch and we can have a chat. But, it's so rare that the percentage in your system, obviously the higher the percentage, the higher the risk. And the reason I was sort of a ticking time bomb when I was diagnosed is that 99% of my blood was dodgy PNH cells. So it was like this 99-1, and I'd not had a blood clot, I'd not had anything. That's usually how people find out, is they get a blood clot, go in, get that sorted, and then either go away and don't find out until they get another one, or someone starts digging into, well, why did you get this blood clot? And obviously, as we all know, get those in certain places and it can be a lights out kind of situation. So yeah, it was really something that I just couldn't have predicted. When you like come home from somewhere and you're just like, oh, I'm just home for Christmas. And basically that like, I think it was going to be like a 2-week visit, turned into about a month to maybe 6 weeks back at the start of 2016. And it was just all like tests and, trying to figure out, could I actually go back to San Francisco? Excuse me. Could it, was it possible to get treatment out there? Was it possible to do it on my insurance? All of these things were suddenly, this dream I'd had from 2012 of living in San Francisco suddenly became this thing where maybe because of something out of my control was going to cause for me to, like, it was going to be the end of me living there, basically, like having to move back because of needing treatment. And obviously, now looking back, I'm like, that makes total sense. And like anybody that's in that situation, you'd be like, yeah, of course I will get the treatment. But when you're 25 turning 26 and you've been living in San Francisco, which has been your dream for years, and you've only been there for a year, and suddenly people then are sort of saying, actually, you might have to move back and it's not your choice. I always just found that quite hard. And luckily, I was very fortunate that somewhere in San Francisco was able to give me treatment, and my insurance, just by pure fluke of the one I'd chosen, covered the cost of it, because it's one of the most expensive drugs in the world. So without that, again, without that sort of like serendipitous looking back and, choosing that insurance that I did, I just wouldn't have been able to have afforded it. It's like millions of dollars a year. And so, yeah, so then after the diagnosis, and honestly, like that whole year is like a little bit of a haze, and I almost don't feel like it was me. Like I feel so different to who I am now, to who I was back then. And it was largely also because at the time of my diagnosis, as I mentioned sort of earlier, that from the outside in looked like it was a dream, but from the inside out, I just wasn't happy. I hadn't been happy for a long time. And that was largely, I feel bad to be like ragging on them a bit, but it was largely work, to be honest. I didn't feel fulfilled. I couldn't ever put my finger on why. And the only thing I can think of is that I started a business when I was much younger, when I was 19, and I had the idea for that when I was 15. And so I always wanted to be back on that entrepreneurial path. So the only thing I can think of is that when working for someone else, especially in situations, that are like high stress, where you're not able to execute on everything that you potentially think is best or that the team thinks are best, like, you're sort of that startup firefighting, doing whatever we need to do to survive. Yeah. I just never felt like I sort of was living at my full potential at all, really. And I wouldn't have known it back then. Like back then I probably would have said, well, maybe I'm at like 80%. But now looking back, I genuinely think that was sort of like, scraping 50, to be honest with you. Like I have done so much more and pushed myself to do so much more when I'm in control of that, like, and able to create what it is that I want to do, that, yeah, it almost feels like that was that fulfillment. And I wasn't happy, but I couldn't even fully articulate why. And so when the diagnosis hit and I found myself, there were quite a few moments following, which probably were just all in my head, but they felt very, very real, where I genuinely thought I was going to die. Like I remember one evening, actually sort of thinking through, gosh, this is scary because I hope my parents will never watch this, but, thinking through, like, I think this might be it, and having to work through, I think, and I'm an only child, I think my parents might find me in the morning, like, fuck, sorry, I don't know if I can swear on this, but, I think it requires an F word. It always is so like automatic when I say that, sorry. And I'd never had to think of that stuff before. And in those moments, like both of the absolute panic of thinking of what they would have to deal with, for myself as well, like believing I was going to die was a thing that allowed me to, hence what I do now is called Unleash Your Extraordinary. Like it really did just unleash something in me to be like, why am I not feeling fulfilled and letting that go on? Why am I sort of not just making these changes? Why am I letting fear hold me back when actually all I could feel in the moments when I thought I was going to die was the regret of not trying that stuff, of not going back to the entrepreneurial path, of, letting fear of, oh God, what if I quit and never get a job again hold me back. Like, as soon as death is sort of facing you, that stuff just didn't, those what ifs became nothing. Like, the what if for me suddenly became, what if I die right now and I've only ever lived at 50%? Like, what? It was just this, I can't do that again. And so that really was this sort of ignition of a fire, I guess, that changed everything and put me back on the path that I actually want to be on. And it's so odd because looking back, I could never, like, if we were speaking before my diagnosis, I would not have been able to predict how I would get back onto the path that now feels like what I have wanted to do since I was 15. It's so odd. And that's simply because of the diagnosis is one part, and my background in product and starting a company at a young age and like building that product is the other bit. But it wouldn't have happened without the diagnosis. It's so odd. It really is that Steve Jobs quote of, you can't connect the dots looking back. You can only connect them. Oh, sorry, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking back. Get that very wrong. And that's, yeah.
I know.
It's like just completely butchering that quote, but I think he's so right. And you just can't predict it. I never ever would have predicted that a life-threatening diagnosis and getting that at the age of 25, soon to be 26 back then, like, I just could never have predicted that, one, that would ever happen to me, and two, that it would be the thing that genuinely like put me on the path of what I have dreamed of doing since like 15 years old. And what I do now in helping people unleash their extraordinary is I sort of go back to the 15-year-old me, because I used to love, I was like that nerd that was listening to like all of the self-help books and big into Tony Robbins, and always sort of wondered, like, how could I help people at this scale? Like, how could I help people be their best self like they are? But I never had that clear path. It was always building products. And now there's frameworks that I've learned from building products that I've then applied to myself to build the person that I actually want to be. But now I help people through the Unleash Your Extraordinary framework build the people they want to be, so that they don't have to wait for their life-threatening wake-up call and to feel that fear of, the F word again, and the risk of regret. But instead, like, if we genuinely can create anything that we want and build the people that we want to be day by day, muscle by muscle almost, whether that's confidence, resilience, turning ideas into reality, if we genuinely can do that, like we build products, because things like Facebook exist in the world, which was some like one person's idea that now serves billions of people. If we can build that, like, we can build ourselves, right? And so that was almost the thread for me from that diagnosis. It took me a year to sort of get back to a good state of mental health, to be honest. Like, I went through such a rainbow of, which is perfect for your t-shirt, anger, and then sadness, and really not knowing what that sadness was. Like, one of the key sort of reflections for me was that at the very beginning, I went to speak to somebody that like specializes in helping those with chronic diagnoses and coming to terms with that, because it really was this, Christ, like, what do you do now? You just have this news and sort of have to absorb it and get on with life. But it changes your future, it changes your identity and all of that kind of stuff. So it was by seeing that lady that she actually reflected back to me, which I hope will be helpful for anyone watching who's going through something like this right now, that another state of that rainbow was also shock. We forget that it's news and it's change and it's having to adapt to that, which can be shock. So a lot of what I would talk to her about, she'd be like, that this is shock, right? And I'm like, no, I've never thought of that actually, because why would I be shocked? It's like, it was almost like I couldn't process that until she then said it, and it made complete sense. Like, the way I was feeling made complete sense, and also gave me the relief that it wasn't going to last forever, that shock would, I'd get used to this change and this news to then be able to sort of feel less sad, feel less angry. But that was just a really helpful word, I guess, for me, or description of how I was feeling, that I never would have thought of myself. It really took somebody else that has helped many, many people with chronic diagnoses to then be able to be like, yeah, this is totally normal. It's like with anything, anything that changes, it's a little bit of readjusting, and that can take us as long as it takes. So it was the sort of, sorry, I realise I'm just like rambling here. This,
No,
you're right.
not.
It's like,
You're not. Another thing that comes up for me is because obviously through the course of this project, I've spoken to quite a lot of people that have had these life-changing circumstances, but also the grief for the life that you thought you were going to have, and suddenly everything's changed so dramatically. So yeah, shock. No one said about shock yet, so you're the first person to tell me about shock, and that makes perfect sense. But yeah, grief has come up before, grieving for the life that they thought they were going to have. But I'm just going to say the product design, Unleash Your Extraordinary. These are workshops that you run, aren't they? Tell us a bit more about, because I love you hear so much. I mean, I know that you've, as have I, done a lot of reading around self-help, personal development. I love all that stuff. But sometimes it can be a little bit, not woo-woo, but sort of like the self-discipline. I love that you're putting the product design structure into the redesigning yourself and being the person that you want to be. So tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you. I think you're totally right. Like the self-help stuff feels to me sometimes like a lot of information. It's always, I sort of go through these phases of myself where I can really tell that I'm in consuming phase versus like creating phase. And I think that's a big piece with a lot of the self-development stuff, whether it's audiobooks or podcasts or whatever. We can just absorb, right, and like consume. And for me, it was really key, especially when I knew from the wake-up call really that I had a lot of changes I wanted to make to turn that into action. And so I feel really fortunate that, that sort of turning an idea or a concept that we wanted to build into reality had been this sort of product muscle that I'd built for years and years. So Unleash Extraordinary is workshops and a framework, and really at the moment, like anything in terms of my focus is getting it out there, getting it into the hands of people. So starting to create a lot more content and just sort of get that out there at a sort of higher level. But it's really these 4 steps that make up the framework, which so much probably easier if I draw it, but that will take time. Which are dream, deconstruct, experiment, evolve. So dream is very much what is it that we want to create? What is it that we want to build or change? So that could be something you want to do today. Like, today I want to just, maybe you've got a meeting coming up and you're like, I want to feel more confident. Like I want to walk into that meeting, say what I have to say and feel confident rather than feel like I'm bricking it. Or it could be this longer term thing, which for me, it very much was, where I was like, okay, Jess, like you've been living life at 50%. You've now seen that because, back in sort of 2017, to be honest, is when I actually really started taking action after that sort of year of processing and starting treatment, etc. And it was really on the anniversary of it that I was like, right, Jess, looking back, it's been a year now. You've made some changes, some tweaks, but you're not fulfilled at work. Like, what are we doing about that? So for me, it was very much that the dream step is setting the vision for what I want to do going forward. How do I want to, I knew that I didn't want to be at that work anymore. I knew I wanted to quit my job. I knew that came with losing my visa, moving back to the UK. I knew I couldn't really fit back into building stuff that wasn't meaningful. So it's like, okay, what does that look like? I knew I wanted to help people learn from the experience that I'd had so that they don't have a wake-up call and feel like they've been living life at 50%. Like, why wait? So for me, it's very much the dream step is the micro changes of today I want to do this or build this muscle, or the macro of actually, if I've, got 10 years or 5 years and I focus on that, this is what I want to build over that time. So that's really getting clarity on what we want to create. And then the deconstruct is probably actually weirdly one of my favorite bits, because in product management and product development, it's all about testing assumptions. So if we, for example, imagine that we want to build an app, and one of the first assumptions we'd want to test is which device do we start with? So an assumption we might make is, everyone's got an iPhone, let's do it on an iPhone. So then what we have to do is, rather than believe that and therefore make an app where maybe everyone's already shifting to Android and we're kind of stuffed, we want to go out and test that. So we'd maybe go to like multiple public locations and just sort of scan around, see the like percentage of Androids versus iPhone, speak to our customers and be like, do you have iPhones or Android? You basically have a hypothesis that you want to go out and test. And so for me, in this world of the sort of building the life that I wanted, my assumptions were my limitations. So who am I to do this? I could never do that. You know, it will fail if I do this. No one will show up if I do that. No one will read this, blah, you know, all of that like rubbish that we tell ourselves. The deconstruct is then drawing out, because we've got clarity on what it is that we want to do, immediately like those limitations and that negative narrative will start popping up. So it's then drawing those out to be like, okay, well, if I now know what could block me from making this happen, how do I now test these assumptions rather than just believe them to be true? So rather than believe, oh, Jess, like you can't do workshops, like no one will show up. It's like, okay, well, how do I test that? Okay, well, maybe I'd like reach out to some people, throw the idea out there, see what the feedback is, or go like really bold and just put something on, see if people buy tickets, see if people come along, all of that kind of stuff. So it's really just what are the first steps that we could take to test that? And then that becomes the experiments that we run. So taking those, really sort of getting as much as possible, like a little bit playful with it, but the focus being on gathering information. And so going out, doing what it takes to test our assumptions. So if we stick with, say, the workshop example, it could be that my experiment is, okay, well, to test this, I'm going to invite 10 people to a free workshop and I'm going to see how many people turn up. And it almost just takes away that risk of failure because you're there to gather information and to learn. So if out of that 10, 8, 7, 3 turned up, that's information for me to be like, oh, I wonder why the 7 didn't show, or I wonder what it was about this that, you know, and then you kind of unpack that a little bit deeper to then go to the last step, which is evolve. So how do I feel different, or what did I learn from the experiments that I ran, and how does that now feed back into this loop of what the dream is and how I change the vision perhaps to basically go through this loop of iteration, which we can just be constantly doing on ourselves. So that before we know it, we've run 5 workshops, 10 workshops, 14 workshops, and you kind of figure out what works. You get into the stride of that. But that's sort of just, and I guess a personal one that I've gone through of that cycle with workshops, but that could be the same with someone's confidence like today, right? If they know they've got something in which they want to feel more confident for, I love just randomly thinking of things like, okay, so if I want to propose this, like a big one with the clients I work with is speaking up in meetings, like sharing their ideas, putting themselves forward. So if it's the speaking up that's scary, if the dream is to be able to share an idea confidently, coherently, without panicking and looking like we're nervous, to deconstruct that, it's like, okay, well, why might I be feeling that way? I'm worried that they're going to think my ideas are silly. So then the experiment could be, okay, well, I'm going to gather 2 or 3 of the team out of, say, like 20 or whatever, and just share it with them first. So before I walk into that meeting, I've already got the feedback that, oh, they haven't said like, Jess, that's stupid, or, you know, anything like that. So that you then go in, deliver it in the meeting, and you've already sort of done this cycle of iteration of testing yourself and testing your assumptions. But sorry, I get so excited about this stuff. So that was a lot of information.
No, I love it. I think it's great that you get excited about it, because that's what it's about, isn't it? Not living your life at 50%, living your life at the 99.9. I don't know whether you count yourself as 100 yet, but you know, doing what makes you feel passionate, doing what really drives you and gets your juices flowing. So it's lovely to watch someone talk about something so coherently and like with such passion. So no, don't apologize.
Okay, perfect. I feel like it's a lot in terms of, you know, sort of basically giving people a tool to apply today, but also to life. It can feel like, oh crap, like it can feel big, I guess. And so I think that's part of the beauty of it as well, though, is that it literally could be like the dream from this is that somebody watches this and then says, oh, okay, like what's a tweak I'd love to make today? And then plays around with that, right? Like looks at, okay, that's the tweak. And then immediately, oh, I feel a bit of fear coming up. What's that? How can I deconstruct what's going to block me? How can I then play with that? And basically just make it fun, right? Because otherwise, and this is the whole point of what I love around the Be Glad movement, is like, let's make it fun. Like these shitty things do happen. And rather than like wait for, you know, for me, it was like, for a long time, it was sort of this focus on going in for treatment which started weekly and then that has expanded now. But that so easily could have taken up the whole of my week, is just focusing on that next thing. and the risk around like flying or doing, and it's like, you just can't live like that. So what we can do is sort of make the most of what we control, which is what we do, how we react to stuff, how we work on ourselves. And that was the biggest wake up call for me, I think, is that looking back, I just wasn't doing that before. You know, I was not loving Monday to Friday, and yet I wasn't doing the maximum that I could do to change that. And the fact that it took believing I was going to die to then do that is just crazy, right? Because if it had gone differently, what a waste. Like, what a waste. I like, you know, not here Jess would be kicking present Jess if she didn't use that wake up call for good. So hopefully that's also a tool that can help your people sort of start their own mini movements with Unleash Extraordinary.
Totally. Oh, I love it. I'll share links to your website and social media
thank you.
As well, so that people, because I think you'll capture a lot of people's attention, because what, you know, you kind of think about CBT, or I'm feeling a certain way, or why am I feeling a certain way? You're kind of using that, but you're also using it in a projecting it forward rather than backward way, which I really love. I love sort of thinking about. I love the way you described it, about talking to a couple of people first, and you know, it's like jumping the gate, but without jumping the full gate, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the thing where one of the hardest things and most overwhelming thing is taking the action, right? That's why so often we have a thought, pause on it, all of the doubt comes in, and then we never take the action, or we take a version of it, and then we almost, and this might just be me, but almost like self-sabotage, right? And that we take a portion of the action but expect the outcome of the full action, and when we don't get it, we're like, oh, didn't work. You know, so if I'd never put on the workshops where I was absolutely bricking it, thinking like, I have no idea if this is going to be helpful for people, you know, and just sort of testing it, if I'd only ever done sort of one-to-one stuff and not given the sort of full version of the workshops, that's unable for me to know whether workshops would work. You know, to test workshops, I had to run a small workshop. It doesn't have to be the big ones, but it's almost like, as much as possible, taking the thought of the big action, but just starting with a little experiment and making each thing an experiment, so that it just lifts that pressure of this has to succeed or it will fail, or, you know, it's just like each thing, and which is a very Tony Robbins thing. So it's probably, hence I've been listening to him since I was 15, you know, that gathering information. Like even now I'll use it when I'm emailing people that I want to meet. It's like, okay, well, this is an experiment. Like, let's just see, you know, rather than thinking, oh, they'll never reply. It's like, okay, well, what if I play with that? What if I just try and like try and guess their email address and send off an email? What if they do? And maybe if they don't, it's then evolving it to be like, okay, maybe email's not the best way to reach out. It's not something then being like, oof, they didn't reply. And again, tiny example that we can sort of use for anything really. But yeah, anyway, I'll stop speaking now. That I just will keep going and going and going.
I absolutely love it. I love it. No, thank you so much for explaining that to us and for telling your story. And I know you still have to have your treatment at the moment, but you're well, or as well as you can be for the moment.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
That's absolutely fab, and I really appreciate you giving up your time, because I know you're heading off to having a special spa day. Are you going with your mum?
Yes, I am, yeah. So we're going off for a little treat on a lovely Monday, which feels very luxurious, just to take a bit of a break.
Yeah, but why not? That's just as important, isn't it?
Exactly, life is short.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll have a wonderful, wonderful time. I'll just round up the video. If you like this video, please do hit the like and subscribe button, and you'll get notifications when new videos are uploaded. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook. If you search @Be Glad Movement, you'll be able to find us. And please do get in touch if you've got a story that you'd like to share. It doesn't matter if it's a story that's similar to somebody else's, because I really do believe your story in your voice has the ability to help someone in their time of need. So please do get in touch if you've got a story. I would love to hear from you. And I look forward to seeing you in another episode. Many thanks.